Thank you, friends, for coming out. This is wonderful. And thank you for supporting LiteracyWorks. This is the series of lectures that we started to have a collaboration with Copperfield's Books this year. And this will be our third this year already. Wow. And this is really exciting. So I just wanted to say I'm the executive director of LiteracyWorks, as Frank said. And we are a program that helps low literacy, low income individuals stay at Santa Rosa JC College, stay in, and help them with their literacy levels, and help them actually get through to a point where they can get better jobs and higher degrees, and it's been really successful, and I'm really honored to be the executive director of these great programs that we do. We also have a parents reading program called Parents as First Teachers that we're starting, which is really exciting, working with our parents to be able to read with their kids and communicate with their kids and sing and play. These are all preschool kids that we work with, and so they're ready for kindergarten. So this is what your help supporting today by coming out. We appreciate that. And I just wanted to mention real quick that you have little blue sheets of paper here. We're not going to ask questions from the crowd, but we want you to write the questions. And if you have anything for Congresswoman Woolsey or Secretary Reich, please write the question, and we will have our ushers collect them every 15 minutes or so. And I will get to read and select the questions. So please print, I guess. So I know what you're saying. Okay. And so without further ado, I want to introduce our director of the LiteracyWorks Center, Chris Schultz, and our student speaker.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? No. My name is Chris Schultz. I'm the director of LiteracyWorks. I am the director of LiteracyWorks, and we meet with students who have low literacy, low income, and high motivation. Rita, our wonderful assistant, colleague, and I did a workshop yesterday with about 40 students. And at one point in the day, we broke them into small groups and had them introduce one another and tell their story. The stories ranged from an individual, a single mom, 4 kids, not speaking much English, but obviously motivated. Another student who started our program 3.5 years ago from the inception, and he spoke of having risen from basic skills English to now being a full-time student, headed with plans to get a PhD so he can start a nonprofit so that kids that grew up with a single mom like he did will have a chance. Everybody has a story. Another student introduced herself. We were talking about career development and where she was going. She said, well, I want to be a nurse. No, I'm going to be a nurse. Well, the individual standing next to me, Raquel, has a story that I think you will find very interesting, and everyone should have such a rich story.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes. Good afternoon, everybody. In our lives, all of us have dreams and goals that we want to fulfill. That is the reason why we wake up every day and face life challenges. My name is Raquel Choto. I am from El Salvador, and I am an English student at the Santa Rosa Junior College. I am also one of the beneficiaries of the LiteracyWorks program. My experience as a student at the Santa Rosa Junior College and with the LiteracyWorks program has exceeded all my expectations. These type of programs not only contribute to the development of the community, but also make that the financial capacity of a person not be an impediment to access education. I'm very grateful for the support I have been receiving, principally from Chris and Rita of the LiteracyWorks program. During 2.5 years I have been here in the United States, my priority has been to learn the language, and without your help, I would not have been able to continue my English studies. My goal is to be fluent in English in order to be able to take the bar exam. I'm a lawyer in my country, but due to the difficult situation that El Salvador is going through, on December 2015, I decided to leave my country. My father is an American citizen, so I had the opportunity to emigrate legally and decided to start a new life here in the United States. I was born in El Salvador in 1979, which was the year where the Civil War started. The war lasted 12 years. As a result of it and many other reasons, today El Salvador is going through some of the saddest time in its history, plunged into corruption and with crime totally out of control. Living my life, my family, and my profession has been the most difficult decision that I have ever made in my life. But I decided to take a risk because I wanted to know how is to live without fear, living in peace and freedom is priceless. It is something that I have never experienced before. Starting over is not easy. The life of an immigrant is really difficult. It is full of challenges, and I always be grateful for your help. Thank you very much.
Hello? I think we've had a little mic trouble. Can you hear me? A little closer?
Turn up the volume.
Yeah. Well, hello, my name is Cheryl Cotler. I am one of the buyers at Copperfields, and Copperfields gives you a warm welcome. I like to say that my job is reading for a living and then giving other people ideas of the things to read. It's truly wonderful. So, this afternoon, I'd like to introduce Lynn Woolsey and Robert Reich. Lynn Woolsey, former U.S. Representative for California's 6th Congressional District, served all of Marin and most of Sonoma County for 20-some years, from 1993 to 2013. She spoke to many issues, not just of local concern, but of national concern, and so you will come to understand for the common good. One such issue was her unceasing efforts to end the war in Iraq, where she addressed the wars from the floor of the House over 430 times. Even retired, she has not stopped doing the work for the common good, And I would like to take a moment to thank her personally as one of her constituents, and I think most of you are as well. She's just behind the curtain, but just a moment. It's not very often that we get to be with one of our representatives, and Lord knows that's a job that I can't imagine how difficult that would be. Secretary Robert Reich, he is the Chancellor Professor of Public Policy at the Goldman School of Public Policy at UC Berkeley. He has served in 3 national administrations, including as Secretary of State under Bill Clinton. He has written 15 books, including Work of Nations, translated into 22 languages, Saving Capitalism, Supercapitalism, and so on. He is a frequent writer for The New Yorker, The Atlantic, The New York Times, Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, and our own San Francisco Chronicle. He is co-creator of the award-winning film Inequality for All, and is chair of the National Governing Board of Common Cause. Robert Reich's newest book, The Common Good, examines this issue, starting with its origins and the collective understanding of this powerful concept necessary to all groups, from family, community, to country. He then moves to what happened to the common good, and finally addresses the very critical question, can the common good be restored? This book is a gem. It is one that has already made its mark and will be, I vouchsafe, become a guide now into the future for each individual to ask themselves, do I understand the common good? Do I believe it is necessary for all life to flourish in a just and ethical world, and hold those in power, including governments, to these tenets? Please help me welcome Lynn Woolsey, Representative Lynn Woolsey, and Secretary Robert Reich.
Already on. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming, and know how important this is to me, because I have been wanting Secretary Robert Reich to come here and be part of our community for at least 15 years now, since you read.
25 years.
All right, but I let you be out of the cabinet, not locked in anymore, when I started asking. So, Secretary Reich and I met 25 years ago. I was elected in 1992, sworn in 93, with Bill Clinton. Robert Reich was appointed to the cabinet as Secretary of Labor at the same time. Luckily for me, I begged and was appointed to the Education and Labor Committee. Now you have to know that not everybody wanted to be on that committee. It was a stop-off point for most members while they were going to the money committees. I stayed on Education and Labor for 20 years. But what was lucky for me was the first secretary I was able to meet and work with was Robert Reich. Straight talking, intelligent, not at all defensive. And believe me, I'll tell you a story later about how he could have been defensive every minute by somebody that was very offensive. But the only thing that wasn't lucky about that was that I thought all secretaries and members of the cabinet were like Robert Reich. Not true, nor are all authors. The Common Good is a book that talks like a real person to real people, and it makes it understandable for all of us, and I thank you for that so much, Bob.
Can I say something wonderful about you?
You may.
First of all, I'm so delighted to be here. And Lynn, I should have accepted your invitation years and years ago. But I want to just say something about marvelous Lynn Woolsey, who is unfortunately no longer your congressperson. But as a cabinet member, I dealt with a lot of members of Congress. In fact, what people don't realize is that when you're a cabinet member, you don't only report to the president, you report to the entire Congress, and every member of Congress, when they call you, feels like they are entitled to have a conversation with you as soon as they call. Now you can imagine what that's like. They're not all like Lynn Woolsey. In fact, this is the rarity. Somebody who deeply and passionately cares about people and about the disadvantaged and about the difficulties that average working people face in this country. And Lynn, you were a total pleasure to work with.
Thank
Not
you.
everybody was.
I get it. I know it. All right. Will you please talk to us about what is the common good and why is it important?
Well, first of all, let me just say that I began writing the book before Donald Trump was elected president. And at that time, when I started, I was 6'1". He's worn me down. And one way, I don't want to make this partisan at all. This is not a partisan discussion, is it? No, it won't be and shouldn't be. But if you think of our current president and think of the opposite, you get the common good in the following sense. The common good is about the norms and the social contract that binds us together. And one way of thinking about it might be simply to, when you get off a plane and you have your luggage checked, and then you go down to baggage, the baggage claim, and all the luggage is there, everybody's luggage. Can you imagine if it was really a dog-eat-dog world in which nobody could be sure that their baggage was going to be there and that somebody else wouldn't take it? We have norms about things. We have a social contract about a lot. Now that social contract has become frayed in the last 30 years. You can still pretty much guarantee that your bag is going to be there at the luggage claim, but with regard to big corporations like Wells Fargo, or with regard to some politicians in terms of how much they rake in, or the amount of money in politics, or people and institutions not paying attention to the spirit of the law, but actually paying attention to the letter of the law, and if they can get away with it, getting away with it. Well, we've seen, unfortunately, more and more of that over the past 20 or 30 years. And I have a lot of ideas about why that deterioration has occurred. But I'm not going to talk about it now because I want you to read the book.
Very smart of you. I forgot to tell you how smart he is. So I have a story that relates to those 30 years. I mean, I'm in the year 26 since I've been retired for 6 years, after 20 years. A question that my constituents ask me over and over, and they've done it since I was first in office and then still now. And the question is, Congresswoman, what surprised you when you were elected and you went to DC. And it was a very, very easy question for me. The answer was, when I first got there in 1993, I was stunned and amazed at how polite members were to each other. Both sides of the aisle. You know, maybe they didn't like each other, but they were nice to each other. I mean, they treated each other with respect. At the same time, my surprise was the Democrats were in charge then, and our schedule was such a frigging mess, you couldn't believe it. We never knew when we'd go home, we didn't know when our meetings were. The trains just didn't run right. Well, then Gingrich took over. Boom, the whole thing reversed. Members stopped being polite to each other. In fact, they were rude. They spoke rudely on the floor to each other. They weren't called down for it. But the trains ran on time. So we all decided when the Democrats got back in charge, we were going to keep their scheduling. But we were not going to keep their negative attitudes. So now, how about talking to us about what happened to the common good?
Well, let me just say this, and Raquel reminded me of this. What a wonderful, articulate person. And thank you, Raquel. The debate over immigration kind of typifies what has gone wrong. I mean, most people, I dare say, in this room are either immigrants or the children or grandchildren or, like me, great-grandchildren of immigrants. Many of our forefathers fled because there was oppression and danger. I know my great-grandparents did. And they were welcomed into this country. We even had a plaque on the Statue of Liberty that said, "Give us your poor and your tired." And people who are fleeing persecution. And how did that turn into such hatefulness? The only people in this country who have any standing to be anti-immigrant are Native Americans. But I think what happened, and a lot of it has to do with not new kinds of racism. I mean, we've been racist and we have been xenophobic as a country to some extent for the past 200 some odd years. No, what's new, I think, is that over the past 30 years, the typical American has not had a raise. In fact, people have been working harder and harder for less and less, adjusted for inflation. And what this means is that people are frustrated and they're angry. Lynn, even in 2015, before anybody heard of any of the politicians who were actually running, except Hillary Clinton, I was out in so-called red states talking to people about their lives and their economic prospects. And I asked people who they're thinking about voting for. And I was amazed. Now this is 2015. This is just at the start. And I was in Missouri and Kansas and Arkansas, and I kept on coming across people who said, well, we're trying to decide between two people. One is Donald Trump, and the other is Bernie Sanders. And I said, what? I mean, these two people are on opposite ends of the spectrum. They're on opposite planets. How can you even how can you say those two names in the same sentence? And what I got back from many people was the same thing. Well, we don't know all that much about them, but they're gonna shake things up. The game is rigged against us. It's rigged against me. And I want to have somebody in there who's going to be for me. The professional politicians, the establishment has not delivered. In fact, if anything, they're corrupt. Now, nobody knew how corrupt Or, you know, he said that he was going to drain the swamp, and he made the swamp deeper and bigger and added out more crocodiles and more alligators. But the fact is that 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, a lot of people wanted to shake things up, and that anger is still there. And I don't mean to be an economic determinist, Lynn, but I do think a lot of it has to do with when people are angry and frustrated, a demagogue can come along and turn their anger and frustration and channel it into rage against immigrants, against minorities, against blacks, against foreigners, against almost any object of rage, against scapegoats. We've seen it before in history. This is not new.
Well, are we actually, we the decision makers, the talkers to the world, yourself, myself, and members that are elected and past members, we get heard. People aren't hearing. I believe we're hearing you. Thank you, because you talk straight to us. But have we as a country become immune to the exploitations that are happening all around us? I mean, and how many people in this country vote against their own best interests?
Well, they vote against their own, I think a lot of people do vote against their own best interests, but they vote out of the same kind of frustration I was just talking about. That is, you know, the United States economy is twice as large today as it was in 1980. And yet, the median wage, adjusted for inflation, has gone nowhere. So where did all the money go? Class. Where did it go? You know, when I talk about this, Lynn, I'm often accused of being a class warrior. I'm not a class warrior, I'm a class worrier. There's a difference. And because so almost a huge percentage of all of the economic gains for the past 30 years have gone to the top, what happens when you get so much economic wealth and income and power at the top? That also translates into political power. And that translates into political power to get subsidies and tax benefits and all kinds of special loopholes that, Lynn, you saw when you were there. And I think Democrats are not nearly as guilty as Republicans, but it's a matter of degree.
True. Pork was one of the dirtiest words that anybody can talk about.
But it's not just pork, it's corporate welfare. You know, when I was Secretary of Labor, Bill Clinton was trying to get people off of welfare and into work, which is a good thing. But a lot of people really needed a lot of training, a lot of job training. This is why LiteracyWorks is such a wonderful thing. We need to have a first-class workforce. We don't generate economic gains by blocking our borders or having tariffs. That's just not the way you gain economically. Is you invest in people and their skills and their capacities and infrastructure. But when Bill Clinton was trying to, again, get people off of welfare into work, but doing it without very much training, and I gave a very impertinent speech. I said, if we really want to raise the money we need for welfare reform to get people off of welfare and into work, maybe we should stop corporate welfare. Aid for dependent corporations. Well, you would think I had declared World War III. You remember that? I was almost fired.
I remember that. You might remember that I was the hand-picked co-chair of the House Welfare Reform Committee, and because I had been a past welfare mama with 3 small children, blah, blah, blah.
I think, excuse me for that, I don't think I think you were the only former welfare mom in Congress.
At that time.
At that time.
Yeah, after me, Barbara Lee, for one, said, "Oh, I can't say that I raised my kids on welfare ever." And I said, "If we don't, who does?" But back to the welfare reform days. I didn't like that we were putting together a new program that didn't have a safety net. And I would speak out, I would go to the meetings, and my staff would say, "Lynn, you can't say those things. That's not why they put you on that committee." And I said, "Excuse me? That is not why I'm on the committee." And it wasn't, I voted against it, even though I was the co-chair of the committee. But you may remember that Bill Clinton referred to me and acknowledged me in his first State of the Union address. So he did not respect, he was a pretty good guy that way, those who didn't totally agree with him. He almost fired you, he didn't. And he actually never stopped being okay with me, even though I didn't vote for his welfare reform plan. Who should we trust? I mean, who should people trust? They don't, they're tired of what's been, they're tired of the gray hairs, they're tired of the establishment. Who can they trust?
Well, I think the real optimism that I have comes from, for example, the teenagers in Florida at Parkside. You know, talk about courage and eloquence and passion and shaming adults into becoming adults. But I've had the great pleasure of spending most of my life, my adult life, in classrooms, teaching young people and talking with people between the ages of 18 and 28. And I'll tell you, I've been teaching since 1981, and I took a little time out to go to Washington, do a few other things, but teaching is what I really do. And I have not come across a generation that is as committed and dedicated and public service minded as the current generation of college students. Really. And so, you know, that gives me great hope. I mean, I was born, Lynn, in 1946.
Baby.
Along with Bill Clinton and George W. Bush and Donald Trump and Dolly Parton. I mean, anybody who's anybody was born in 1946. But I think that we baby boomers may not have done what we should have done. It's a crass generalization. But I think this next generation, it will do it.
Thank you. I have a story I want to tell about when things really became clear to me in the House that the common good was less important than it had been. It was 1997, I believe. Gingrich had taken over the House and filled it with members who hated government. They ran to be in the House because they did not like government. That was mind-numbing. You were there, sitting at the front table at a Ed and Labor Committee meeting. By the way, I want to say something about Ed and Labor. That committee was the Education and Labor Committee until Republicans were in charge, and then it became the Education and Workforce Protection Committee because they could not abide by the word labor. It was just a toxic word to them. So, and then when we'd get the majority back, we'd change it back. Well, because we got it, you know. So we were at this hearing. Members, what they do is make opening remarks at their committee meetings, and when the Secretary of Labor or the department that's responsible, the committee is responsible to work with is in front of us, people give big speeches, members, everyone, at least 5 minutes long. poor secretary sits there and listens to them all. Well, it came time for Duke Cunningham, who was my classmate, so he was probably on the second level tier with me, only on the other side of the aisle. And he opened his remarks with, "Mr. Secretary, I have read all of Karl Marx's works and writings, and I see no difference between you and he." The room, which was full, gasped. And that was about it because...
I actually said thank you.
And that was the end of it, because Bob didn't bite into it, he didn't start something with him other than thank you. And a few years later, Duke Cunningham went to prison.
As Karl Marx would have predicted.
That's right. So, Mr. Secretary, how do we restore the common good, and can we, and of course we should, I'm not even going to say should we.
Well, I think we will and we are, Lynn, and I just reflect a little bit on my optimism. The other part of my optimism is that I have not seen, since the Vietnam War and the anti-Vietnam War movement, and the degree of grassroots activity that I'm seeing right now, all over the country, in red states and blue states, people who are saying, we have to get involved for our children's sake, for our grandchildren's sake. We are getting involved, and I think that really is the silver lining on all of this. Because it is only when, and this is human nature, it's only when you are in danger of losing something that is enormously valuable to you that you realize how valuable it is. And that's democracy. That's what's valuable. That's what we are in danger of losing. We've all become, I think, very complacent. And under the current administration, and with some of the attacks on the press and the judiciary, attacks on the intelligence services, attacks on even parts of the country that we never assumed that would be attacked, and parts of our democracy that we assumed would never be attacked. The kind of viciousness that really did begin with Gingrich. Yes. It's not new. But I think right now people are saying, wait a minute, our democracy is in jeopardy. And they are organizing, and many of you are organizing, and I want to thank you for it. I think that is really what gives me most optimism of all. But I do talk in here about some other specific things that we all can be doing.
So read his book. It's really a good read. So, how would getting money out of politics help?
Well, I think that's number one. In other words, it would be, people say, well, what should we do? Well, obviously, we have got to tackle climate change. And obviously, we need Medicare for all, a single-payer system. And obviously, we need all sorts of things. But we're not going to even begin to get there unless we get big money out of politics. That is the beginning. That's the basic foundation reform. And I think that's possible, Lynn. People say to me, well, we can't do it because of Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission. And actually, there are many things that can be done even with Citizens United on the books, such as public financing of elections, such as full disclosure of where every dollar comes from that is aiming for an election. You can applaud. Such as slowing down or stopping the revolving door between government and business. And I could give you a very long list. All of them could be done. They could be done at the federal level, they could be done at the state level. Redistricting, California actually has led the way on redistricting, but avoiding the kind of gerrymandering we're now seeing around the country. avoiding kind of voter suppression, the kind of voter suppression we're now seeing. All of this is part of what is a democracy movement, and I think it's growing.
I agree with you totally. I think if we don't get money out of politics, we will lose our democracy. And I hear that's what you're saying. So my question next is, why are leaders who are elected by their constituents reluctant to stand up and be counted when they know what's happening is wrong? I don't think
Well,
it was in the book.
Yeah, well, it is in the book. I mean, but I wasn't going to reveal that because I want you. Well, for one, here's one thing. When I started out, my first job in Washington was in 1967. I was an intern for Robert F. Kennedy. And I was in charge, well, it was not a glamorous job. I was in charge of his signature machine. Which meant that every day I had a big stack of mail with his, on his official stationery, and I just had to line it up and make sure that the pen on the signature machine would write Robert F. Kennedy. Lynn, I got so bored.
Oh, I can imagine.
After 3 months, 2.5 months, that I decided, I went in at night and I wrote letters. I typed letters to my friends on his signature, on his stationery, and then dear Mr. Dworkin, congratulations on having the largest nose in New York State. Robert F. Kennedy. People still have these things as mementos. But what I meant to say is that in 1967, only 3% of retiring members of Congress went on to become lobbyists. Today, 50% of retiring members of Congress become lobbyists. Not you.
No.
In fact, she's wonderful. She really is. You're very lucky to have had her representing you. But ask yourself, why is it that we now have half of all retiring members of Congress, including half of all Democrats, becoming lobbyists? Well, one of the reasons is that the norms and the ethics and the constraints surrounding all of this have evaporated. But another very closely aligned reason is that there's so much money involved in lobbying. It wasn't there in 1967. In 1967, Washington was kind of a seedy town. It didn't have the kind of fancy bistros and restaurants with the heavy utensils and the linen napkins and all of the things that are now, and the great hotels. It didn't. It was a place where if I went to get lunch, there were cockroaches all over most restaurants. I mean, really. I'm not recommending that. I'm just saying that Washington has become an emerald city. And this just goes back to the same point. There's been a huge and long breakdown. Donald Trump is just the end of a long period of time where we just haven't bothered to pay enough attention. He's the consequence, not the cause, of a lot of the problems we're now having.
So, you didn't answer my question. My question is, then why don't his party leaders, give it to them, stand up to what he's doing to our country?
I think because, number one, they read the polls and they find that most Republicans, at least registered Republicans, are supportive of him and they don't want to lose their jobs. But I would say that there is more to it than that. I think, as I suggested before, Democrats themselves are not being the leaders we need Democrats to be, in part because they are taking too much money from the moneyed interests in America. So you've got a double-barrel problem. And I think that's part of the democracy, to the extent that there is a democracy movement. Part of that democracy movement is getting people to run for office who are not beholden to the moneyed interest, getting people to run for office who will take small contributions only, like Bernie Sanders did. Getting people to run for office who really are people of deep and passionate integrity. And this election, Lynn, and this 2018 midterm, I am amazed at how many people are coming in who have never run before, are running for Congress, running for state office. It's, and especially women. Huge, huge.
Well, I am also amazed at what my cell phone does every day. Some Democrat or some political cause is asking me for money. I'm sick of it. So one of my observations have been since getting out, resigning, I usually call it that I graduated from Congress, but I really retired. My number one observation, and it brings tears to my eyes, is that my party, who I love very much, and the leadership, they do not see what those of us that are outside of the system now, or outside of politics, see. They don't see that our Democrats are seen not that different than the Republicans. And they don't see it, they do not see it. And I know how hard they're working, because I know how hard I work. And when you're in there, you're working, you're fighting for what you think is the right cause, and you're doing your thing, it's really hard to look outside and say, oh yeah, but nobody likes me. But they've got to open their eyes, because they have to have a message that says something and means something.
I couldn't agree more, and I think I think it's more than a message. I think the Democrats have got to embrace a few big ideas and policies that really will make a difference to people's lives. Again, there may be a lot of disagreement in this room, but I do believe that a single-payer Medicare for all is critically important.
So we are going to have questions from the audience. Paul, how much time do we have before we have you?
Let's see, 10 more minutes.
Okay, well, we have plenty to talk about. I did have 20. I had another great question.
Lynn, when you say you retired,
Retired.
I don't know what that means for you. I mean, you're not retiring in any way.
No, that's true.
And no, but I'm serious. You have not retired. You're very active. You are extraordinary in terms of all of the activities, all the things that you do. I think retirement is just about doing more of what you want to do and less of what you don't want to do.
Right. For free. And doing it for free.
Doing it. Well, I mean, but what also worries me is that fewer and fewer people are able to retire because we don't have pensions as we used to have. I don't want to romanticize the past, but many people in this room remember when there were pensions that were called defined benefit pensions. That would mean you work for a company, and that company would guarantee you that after a certain number of years, you would get a certain amount of money as a pension. Now, and then it all became defined contribution. A company, if you were lucky, would then put up a certain amount of money, maybe matching dollar for dollar, or maybe putting up 25 cents for every dollar you put away. And now it's just 401ks. I mean, you're lucky if you can just put away your own money. Well, that's not enough. And Social Security does not do nearly enough. So, and what about all these young people who have all this student debt? This is outrageous. I'm teaching at the University of California, Berkeley, some of the best students. I used to teach at Harvard, Berkeley students are every bit as good as the Harvard students I used to teach. The only difference is they're not as entitled.
Yes, oh, that's good.
But they have a lot more debt. They're not from wealthy families. And right now we've got in this country about $1.3 trillion, last time I looked, of student debt. And a lot of these young people, they can't do what they want to do. They can't follow their ideals and their passions. They have got to get the best job they can that pays as much as they can get in order to start reducing that debt. I really do believe we've got to get back to the point where, at least for public universities, public higher education is free. That's what we used to have. That's where we were then, in the late 60s.
Well, now that we're talking about education, let's talk about the decisions voters make based on if they're educated or not. Do you feel that that makes a difference? Are you...
Well, I think it certainly, I mean, in order for a democracy to work,
Yes.
Thomas Jefferson understood this, and he said, we need to ensure that our citizens who are voting are educated. They've got to be educated to be, not to have great jobs. You know, now everybody says, well, we've got to have more education because you've got to have an education to have a great job. No, the founding fathers talked about education and public education as a means of training and ensuring that we had a citizenry able to function and fulfill their responsibilities in a democracy. That's different. And that's really important.
I have a confession, however. I am actually one of those people that could have been labeled a liberal elitist. Me. I mean, no, and I'm sure I was, and it was a mistake, but I mean, I didn't mean it to be elitist. I was so proud of my district. I mean, this is the most amazing group of people. They are one of the best educated groups in the country, one of the highest incomes, and one of the most caring about the environment, about education, everything. They, for Obama's first election, we had an over 90% voter turnout in my district. So I bragged. But you know what? The people that voted for Donald Trump are the very population that would say you're an elitist. I mean, they wouldn't have paid any attention that everything I did was for them. You know, in spite of my high-income district, you know, I walked my talk and did my due because I believed in what I believed and they believed with me. But we elitists, like I was, and probably still I am because I can't change that fast, it hurt those people. It hurt the people in the Middle West that didn't have jobs, whose we were ignoring as Democrats. We really were ignoring them. No, go ahead, respond.
Well, I don't know, Lynn, that that's completely fair. I think that those people are now, if you look at that new tax bill does not help those working class people in red states. They're getting almost nothing out of it. In fact, at the end of the line, they're going to actually lose ground because it's going to require major cuts in a lot of programs they depend on, like Medicaid. If you look at almost everything that's being done in Washington right now in the name of so-called average working Americans, they are getting, they're getting shafted. I was looking for a term just then. And I think that it's fair to say, although there is not as much of a difference between Democrats and Republicans as you and I might like there to be, it's still the case that the working class of America was doing much better under Democrats. And You know, when I was labor secretary, 22 million net new jobs were created in the United States. I take full credit. No, obviously, there's no administration that can take full credit, but the investments in education and job training and the attempts, at least, to get health care and also infrastructure, all of these investments in people, if we don't invest in people, we cannot have a just society and we can't grow as a society.
So Paul is on his way up here to start asking questions, but I'm going to ask the first one because I have the microphone.
I do too.
I know, it's up to you. I'm asking you. Does it bother you when you know that when a CEO or some big rich dude reads your book, it's going to say, the guy's soft. This is unrealistic. How can it happen? We can't do this. Because that's how they've talked about me my entire career.
Well, they don't understand history. That's one thing. Now, I don't want to, again, I want to make sure that nobody misunderstands me. I'm not going to romanticize the 50s and 60s because there was a lot wrong, and women and African Americans were second-class citizens, but at least we were striving in terms of the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and everything else we tried to do, and Medicare and Medicaid. The marginal income tax on the top incomes in the 1950s under Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican, was 91%. Now, even after you take account of all of the tax credits and tax deductions, the highest income earners in this country were paying 52% of their marginal income, the top marginal income. And we invested that money in highways. We had the largest highway building program and the largest expansion of federal higher education and education generally. And we made huge strides. We rebuilt Europe. We rebuilt Japan. We were a generous country in many respects. So anybody who says this is kind of soft and we're not being realistic doesn't understand where we were as a country. Where we've been since the 1980s is the aberration.
So you agree with me. If anybody tells me I'm soft, I go, oh, I'm doing it right. Thank you. Here comes the other question.
I know everybody can, sorry. It's on, I have to put it right up to my mouth. I know everybody can listen to both of you for another hour or two or three.
Okay, we'll be here for 3 hours. We'll test that idea.
But all things come to all good things come to an end, and I have a few questions from the crowd. Great questions. I won't be able to get to all of them, so thank you for submitting. My favorite so far here is how do we get back to truly valuing education? If funding levels are a reflection of what we value, why are our teachers so underpaid and schools so lacking in resources? So that's Secretary.
One thing we don't acknowledge is that as education funding per student has stagnated or dropped in most states, more and more state resources have gone into prisons. We've been building prisons and jails. We've been putting people away in prisons for non-violent crimes, many of them related to drugs. If we didn't do that, we'd have more money for education. And by the way, if we had more money for education, maybe fewer young people would go into drugs and drug running.
Is there such a thing as a good tariff?
Such a thing as a good tariff. No. I spoke a little bit too quickly. Alexander Hamilton did have a notion that made sense when we, as an economy, had infant industries. And it was very hard for us to compete mostly with the British, secondarily with the Germans, because they could undercut us, whatever we did. We needed some protection for those infant industries. And Hamilton's ideas made some sense. They didn't make a lot of sense to the southern farmers, who then had to pay more for every machine they used. And that was a source of enormous friction. But arguably, it may make sense. But tariffs really have nothing to do with a modern economy. This is pure craziness. A trade war with China, even though China is not a free market economy and China doesn't play by the same rules we do, the idea that somehow we are going to get China to do better by unilaterally, not working with Europe, not working with any allies, by unilaterally creating a trade war with them is absolutely dangerous bonkers.
This is for both of you, and there was a number of questions that kind of sum this up. Why don't we eliminate the Electoral College?
Well, why we can't is because there are more states that have lower populations that benefit from the Electoral College. That's all. That's why they have 2 senators when the state population is the same as 1 congressional district. That's the only way. Our founding fathers thought that it would balance between the large states and the less populated states. That's why it isn't happening. Now, maybe Secretary Reich has an idea of how it could happen. I don't have the answer.
Well, I don't have an answer, but I think that there is a way to do this. You don't have to amend the Constitution. I think, Lynn, you're absolutely right. It would be impossible to amend the Constitution because there's so many states that don't want to do it. But there is something going around now, the Interstate Compact, which stands for a very simple proposition. A state agrees. Now, already something like 17 or 18 states have agreed to this. Agrees that it will give all of its electors to the person who wins the popular vote. Now, if only we had states whose electors totaled 270, that's the magic number, agreeing to that compact, that would make the Electoral College irrelevant. And we're very close. We're very close. I think there's something like 5 more states are needed. So this is not something that is impossible. I think that there's public interest and that movement is growing.
Thank you. Here's a question. Several people asked this. To sum it up, do you believe unions work?
Yes. Not only do unions work, but in low-wage areas, low-wage occupations, retail, restaurant, hotel, hospital, even childcare and elder care, you need unions because these people are paid very, very little. They deserve a union. They need higher wages. And those higher wages, by the way, are going to help the economy because there's a multiplier effect. Somebody gets higher wages, they can spend more. If they spend more, that creates more jobs. If more jobs are created, that is a virtuous cycle of a sort that we used to be in. Again, I don't want to romanticize any time in the past, but in the 1950s and early 1960s, 1 out of every 3 people in the private sector of this country was a member of a union. And that gave American workers enough of a voice and bargaining power to get some of the benefits of an economy that was rip-roaring. And because they had that bargaining power and they got those wages, they could turn around and buy. Right now, fewer than 7% of private sector workers are unionized, which means American workers have very, very little voice, very little bargaining power, and the middle class is shrinking.
Okay. This is for Congresswoman Woolsey. It's a little long here, but I want to read this because I think it's a great question. I'm 15 years old and want to become a senator, or at least be involved in politics, and I'm older. I was wondering about some ways I could start building my political career. What has inspired me to become a senator is being a victim to the Tubbs fire and not receiving sufficient government support.
Well, I'm going to give you all my lecture that I give to it. I used to give to high school seniors and juniors. Step one, be involved. You don't have to be involved in anything I'm interested in. You have to be involved in what you're interested in. And you have to be a team player. And if there's not good leadership, take over, like certainly Robert Reich has over the years, and certainly you know I have. But if there's a good leadership, be on the team and make things happen. Do not stand around and watch the world go by you. Get involved. Young 15-year-old, God bless you. Thank you for thinking. Thank you for knowing there has to be a way out. You're not going to start as a senator, probably. But get involved and make a difference, and you'll find your way to being a leader, and you'll build your constituency, and it can happen. And I'm always available to talk to people that are interested in running and needing any kind of help. Not money help, I don't have any money. I have time. So thank you for caring.
You know, Lynn, you said that you can't start out as a senator. I think that Robert F. Kennedy started out as a senator, didn't he?
Yeah.
So if your brother becomes president, there's no telling where you
That's
find
true.
Or your sister.
Well, I guess I have a question as a sidebar for the secretary is, and this also has to be, this is about being involved. And I hesitate to say you're the head of the resistance, but you're certainly a big voice in the resistance. And what can people do to get involved to overturn what's the direction of this country's going in?
A vote. Get others to vote. The 2018 midterms are going to be, as are the 2020 general elections, dependent on voting. The largest party in the United States, and Lynn, you know this, is not the Democratic Party. It's not the Republican Party. It's the party of non-voters. And I say this particularly to young people all the time, but it's really something we all have to take to heart. And that is, demonstrations are great. Demonstrations make us feel good, and they also create, among many of us, I know when I've demonstrated, a sense of hopefulness, because there's so many other people that feel the same way you do. And you just, it's important that we do that. But if we just demonstrate and don't get politically active, it is an exercise that has no meaning at all. So we've got to be politically active.
Thank you. So kind of along those lines, what do the Democrats need to do to present a unified, inspiring message to the voters in November? And that's for both of you, I guess.
Well, what did Mark Twain once say? He said that I don't belong to any organized political party. I'm a Democrat. And I think this goes back, Lynn, to something you said before, that when Newt Gingrich came to town, people no longer were civil to each other in Congress, but they were very organized. And there is an asymmetry in American politics. And that asymmetry is that if you are of the, and I hate to use this word too generally or too loosely, but if you are of the authoritarian bent, let's put it that way, if you believe in discipline and order and rank, you very often are attracted to the Republican Party, which means that you're going to have a party that is going to be marching in lockstep. By contrast, if you really don't believe in discipline, and you don't believe in order, and you don't run in lockstep, and you believe 1,000 flowers ought to be blooming all the time, you're probably going to be more attracted to the Democratic Party, which means that there's going to be a level of disorganization and disunity, such as you in this room, if you haven't been directly in politics, can't possibly imagine. Not to say that it's impossible, and Lynn, you and I have talked even today about messaging and what are some policies, but let's not get our hopes up too high that we're going to have a very, very strictly well-organized, well-oiled Democratic machine anytime soon.
Mr. Secretary, why aren't politicians ever sued for libel or slander?
Well, the laws of this country make it very difficult to sue a politician for libel or slander, and I think that's probably right. I want our politicians to be able to say exactly what they want to say without fear. And although the libel and slander laws may have some chilling effect, I think, as we were talking before, the biggest chilling effect is money. So I'd say let's just not worry about libel and slander right now. Let's worry about the reluctance to bite the hand that feeds you, which means the necessity of getting big money out of politics.
So can I follow up on that? There's a bipartisan organization in our country that is it's just over a year old now. It's called Issue 1, the Reformers, and it's made up of past elected officials from governors and mayors and House and Senate, and it is almost bipartisan. It's a little bit more Democrat. I'm about the 38th member out of 200 now. And the issue is getting money out of politics. So with a lot of support, it might happen. I'm watching them get kind of soft on that because they're thinking it's only going to needs Citizens United. I say no. Transparency, there's a lot we can do. So, but at least there is an organization that knows that money in politics could be the end of our democracy.
That's very encouraging, Lynn. I also am chairman of a group called Common Cause.
Yes.
That is also trying to do the same thing. But on the note of bipartisanship, 2 years ago, I went down to the 7th District of Virginia to talk to a man named David Bratt, a congressman. He was the one who, in the Republican primary a few years ago, got rid of Eric Cantor. Do you remember that? Now, here's the thing about David Bratt. Now, he is a Republican. He is not only a Republican, but according to the Conservative Digest, he is now one of the 2 most conservative members of Congress. And I went down to talk to him because I was in the area, and I was also curious because he had said some interesting things about money in politics. And we spent a couple of hours together, and on almost every other issue, we might as well be on different galaxies, not just planets. But when it came to the issue of money in politics, he sounded exactly like you and me. He said the biggest problem we have is crony capitalism. Big companies, Wall Street, paying off their patrons, paying off people in Congress. We've got to get big money out of politics. He was absolutely livid. So get him to join in your group.
Well, he has to be a past member, is he?
Well,
gone?
let's get him out of Congress.
And I say that as not a few times I was the first most progressive member of the House of Representatives.
I remember that.
And it's the same scale that this man was the most conservative. We'd have gotten along really well.
All right, here's a, Mr. Secretary, question, a real softball, easy question. How do we eliminate fake news?
We get Walter Cronkite back. Some of you are too young to remember Walter Cronkite. I think that really this goes back to our discussion on education. Part of education needs to be citizenship education. And part of citizenship education needs to be sorting the truth from what is not truthful. Learning the reliable sources of news. Learning to spread reliable news and stop spreading stuff that is just sensational. And I think it's got to start in 6th grade.
With education.
Okay, great, thank you. What do you think about the current administration's stand on trade with China? Mr. Secretary. What's that?
He answered that.
Oh, did he before? Okay. Okay, we'll go this way. Well, this is, okay, we're down to our last 2 questions here. So, how do you increase median wages in America? Isn't that the responsibility of the business owners? It's not just about workers becoming more educated.
Well, starting in 1938, we've had a minimum wage, a federal minimum wage. And the thinking, starting in 1938, was that you want to establish a floor under which it is just simply wrong for people to be paid less than that floor. And that wrongness is not all that different from the wrongness that comes with having unsafe working conditions or putting children to work. That is, you want some standards. If it was just a free market, then it would be survival of the fittest. A civilization is really about standards that we apply particularly to how and when people work and what they work for a living. That's why we also had time and a half for overtime. That's why we also created weekends, and why we have all kinds of, I think, common sense regulations. The minimum wage, federal minimum wage, is now $7.25, I believe, an hour. Now, you try to live on that. When I was Secretary of Labor, there were not too many people in America who were working full-time and yet were still poor. Now we have a large and growing population of working poor. That is wrong. That should be an oxymoron, working poor. If somebody's working full-time, they ought to be out of poverty. Also, this notion I keep on hearing every time anybody talks about raising the minimum wage. By the way, if you just took the minimum wage that we had in this country in 1968 and adjusted it for inflation to 2018, that 1968 minimum wage would now be $11.60. So you can see how far below even 1968 levels we are now. Employers tell me all the time, employer associations, I should say all the time, well, if we raise the minimum wage, we're just going to have fewer workers. Let me just say, Study after study after study finds that if you raise the minimum wage not to $50 an hour, not to $25 an hour, but to $15 an hour, or to $16 or $17 an hour, if you do that, you put, as we were talking about before, more money in people's pockets. They spend more, they therefore create more jobs. It's more jobs that you get, not fewer jobs. And you rebuild the middle class. It's not the be-all and end-all, it's not the only thing we need to do, but it's one of the 20 things we must do.
Question. The audience was really curious. A number of people submitted questions for you to gaze into your crystal ball and to see who the presidential candidates, who would be running in the next presidential election.
Do you want to take it first?
Well, I'll tell you what I'm going to do at this point. I'm going to support Joe Biden as long as he's in the race. And that's because I want somebody of his caliber to be running in the primaries to keep the Democratic discussion honest. Okay, I mean, I can't think of anybody else of higher regard that might be running for me. Now, I don't think this country is going to vote for a minority again for a while, or for a woman. So we Democrats have to get smart and find a talented white guy. I'm pointing at you, Mr. Secretary, that the country loves, and that's what I'm hoping for.
Well, I'm going to take a slightly different position. I think if we're not going to nominate, we Democrats are not going to nominate Michelle Obama or Oprah Winfrey, and either of them I think would be pretty damn good. If we're not, then I think we have to look for somebody who is under age 50. And believe it or not, there are some people out there who are under age 50. I've met a few of them. They're even in politics. I don't have any friends under 50, but I've met some of them. No, I say this because I think that we're just getting, and I'm looking at all of you, and I've got to watch myself very carefully. But I think we're getting a little long in the tooth. And I think we've got to understand that the energy and the promise and hope in the future is with a new generation.
All right, let's give a large